Hi, in a previous video we looked at the positive impact of IT on society, and in this video we're going to look at some negative impacts of IT on society. So what you'll find is that despite the many positive impacts of IT on society, there will be some downsides with it. You will also find that these are commonly more reported than positive impacts because in society we tend to respond more to negative influences rather than positive influences, and if you go to most news sites, more often than not there will be a story in there about a negative impact of IT on society. So for example, we have an example here which is from the BBC News, which was reported this week, and that is this story here, which is that over the course of using the internet, over half of the people in the UK say they've been harmed while using it online. And obviously this is from a little bit earlier in this week. I'm recording it a few days after the 18th of September. But if you click on the tech tab, you'll find there's lots of different stories here. So this is a negative story. Twitter warns direct messages are exposed. I suppose you could say this one down here about Facebook stops staff helping politicians. I suppose you could say that's a vaguely positive one. But whenever you look at all this other stuff, most of this is negative. So it's very easy to actually find negative stories out there. And the key thing is to be able to balance when you see these negative news stories versus the positives that we all know that IT has on society. So going back to the PowerPoint, I actually clicked on the PowerPoint itself rather than the displaying it. So some of the ones that I came up with, and what you'll find is that I'm not going to cover every different type of negative impact, and actually as IT develops you'll find there'll be different types of negative impacts coming out. So some may be more relevant to you than others, but generally you'll find most of the negatives being displayed in the categories that I'm about to show you. So first of all, one of the big ones is security and privacy. So you very frequently see stories about people's data or security being compromised, such as the Facebook story with Cambridge Analytica, or the story that was just on the BBC News about the direct messages from Twitter being hacked. So all of this stuff is hugely important. So I don't think whatever happens with the development of IT, it's never going to be 100% foolproof. There are always going to be some kind of security issues. But then if you think about over the course of history, even if you had stuff written down on paper, ultimately that's still not foolproof. And in terms of things like if that paper was taken, it's probably likely to be less secure than if you had in electronic format, although actually getting it in the first place may be slightly more difficult. Communication language skills. So as people use IT more and more, communication skills tend to reduce. It's always going to be the way. If you have less face-to-face contact, those skills are going to go down. Ultimately being able to see other people and see their reactions to things that you say is a critical life skill. And also things in terms of language skills. So I know that in my experience as a teacher, the quality of the communication I receive from students, written communication, is now much poorer. It's basic things such as lack of capitalization, which students and people don't capitalize as much in things like text messages and communication on the internet anymore, whereas actually when you're doing a written document or even an email to someone who is in a position such as your tutor, it should be written professionally, and these skills are going down. You've got loss of jobs, so while there may be some jobs created, you will find that there will be a loss of some types of jobs, especially in the day-to-day running type jobs. So you could, for example, have robots which are picking items in a warehouse these days, whereas humans might have done that in the past, or you might have automated shopping tills, again, whereas you would needed somebody to actually staff it in the past. But these days, you can have much more kind of machines and IT doing it for you. And you got to remember that in terms of machines, they don't ever require breaks or a coffee break or whatever it might be. They don't turn up late. They constantly kind of work generally as you would expect them to. There is the odd frustration. If you go through the automated shopping areas when you get the unexpected item in bag and area, it's very frustrating. But at the end of the day, somebody comes over and scans the barcode in, and you move on from there. And once you have them installed, they're going to cost much less. So from a company's point of view, it's a no-brainer really to have machines in there doing these sorts of work. But you will find there will be some jobs created, because ultimately IT has got to be run, it's got to be made, the actual systems have got to be made. Now that is a highly skilled job rather than the procedural job which is been lost, if that kind of makes sense. So the actual skills in order to create this IT is a much higher level job than the ones that they're losing. So while some jobs are being created, it's the more day-to-day running that we are losing. You've also got cost. So IT is expensive. We've just had a new iPhone come out. That's going to be several £100s in order to buy. But also for companies to actually go and install and upgrade some of their technology. So let's say, for example, if you're looking at a classroom, because obviously I teach, so if you're looking at a classroom of 25 computers, and each one of those computers is going to cost you £400 just for the computer, that's not the software, then all of a sudden you're looking at spending about £80,000 on one classroom. And then all of a sudden you need things like software on top of it. So in the IT labs, you may need things like the Adobe Suite. You're almost certainly going to need the Office Suite. And you're going to need to have it hooked up to the internet, and all these things cost a lot of money, and not all companies have it, so that may be a negative impact. So you've got piracy. So I don't think this is ever going to go away. Okay, but what you have is it's going to be managed better in the future, and you may find piracy rates go down. So obviously, piracy is obviously illegal acquiring of software. And it tends to happen more in developing countries because they haven't got the available funds to go out and buy this stuff. So it tends to be something, they just go out and download it. Compatibility is talking about where you have older systems. It's one of the issues that is relatively newer in IT, because ultimately it's quite a new area. Things like the newer Windows 10 machines, are they compatible with let's say operating system further back? Can you run programs that were designed for Windows XP on Windows 10? And if you can't, then you're going to need to upgrade it. It's going to cost you money. Okay, and it's going to be issues with things like phones, where you have much older phones. Are they compatible with newer technology? Again, if they're not, you're going to need to upgrade them. It's going to cost you money. Cyberbullying and antisocial behaviour is a massive issue these days. It is very, very common when you look online on pretty much all types, especially social media, where you are on the website and people just will say whatever they think without actually thinking of consequences. So or they'll say things that are specifically designed to get a reaction, where you'd never say that sort of thing in the real world, because you might get, for example, a punch in the face or whatever it might be. Ultimately, people, when they are behind a keyboard and there's nobody else around them and there is no direct impact for the things they are saying, will say some horrible things. And it is a situation that's getting worse and worse, because there are more and more people using these systems like social media, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, and the more people that use them, the wider variety of messages you're going to get. And as you get people that have this thing in the head, something must be right because they saw it on a message board or whatever it might be, and then they just go out and put it somewhere else, and they don't think through the consequences of what they're saying. Cyberbullying is obviously a very big thing, especially through social media again. I mean, it's a very common pattern here. Social media is really the thing that's brought on these antisocial behaviours, whereby people will say things in order to make other people feel bad and get a reaction because there is no direct consequence for them. It's quite worrying at times, really, to be honest. But it is something to be looking out for. Health concerns, obviously a big thing, such as obesity. Ultimately, if you're using IT, you probably are not, spending a lot of time exercising in terms of, if you're at a PC or a laptop working. Now there is developments in the use of IT with fitness, such as Fitbits and so on, but for the most part, if you're using IT, you're probably not building up your fitness. RSI, which stands for repetitive strain injury, and that is where very common with things like your fingers, where, for example, you type lots and you get the jarring effect of your fingers on the keyboard constantly. And I mean, you might not think about it when you're using a keyboard, but you think of the amount of times that your fingers actually depress the keys, then eventually the stresses on your knuckles and your joints become quite sore, and it can eventually lead to things like arthritis, which obviously isn't a good thing. And of course, you've got eye strain, because if you're staring at a screen for extended periods, it is not going to do your eyes any good at all. Your ability to see longer distances is going to be compromised if you are constantly staring at a screen. There are going to be more, negative impacts out there, but ultimately, in terms of what I was going to cover, that is it. So, if you do want to cover other stuff, sorry, I think I broke off there. If you do want to cover other stuff, by all means, go out and do it. But ultimately, if you're covering those areas, you're not going to be too far off the mark. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so that when I put more videos on there about things which are relevant to your course, you will get them sooner. Thank you for watching. Have a good afternoon.